Right, rook versus pawn mixed bag. Got 9 different positions here. Just to sort of finish off, I say finish off, I'm going to make another video about 5 positions that are just amazing in their studies, although not really to do with, not really following on from the themes and the concepts that we've covered in all these rook versus pawn videos. So I've got 9 positions here that will finish off those themes and concepts. Endings 21 to 29 in the Book of Jesus. But I've actually missed out one. I found it very hard to structure rook versus pawn. I tried to structure them in a reasonable way, starting off with that critical crossroads position, the white plays a win, black plays a draw, those 4 positions. I won't go into that again, although it might feature in one of these positions here in this video. In fact, I'm pretty sure it does. It's such an important crossroads. So yeah, covered all of those, and then I sort of had to pick off the other concepts one by one as I came across them in games, and you'll see some of them cropping up again here. But there is one that I've missed out. It's actually ending 22 in the Book of Jesus, in case anyone's sort of interested in referencing it. It's quite a simple one. For example, in this position, this is a game from 1986. It's black to play. What would you do? Pause the video and have a go at it. And once you see what you should play here as black, it's so simple. It's such an easy thing to understand, such a simple concept, and it's just like, oh yeah, that's easy. I'm going to do that in my games. That's the plan, I guess. So yeah, I've got that one last concept to cover, but also just generally in this video, we've got 9 different positions that will hopefully feature concepts at random from those endings, which is what chess is, right? You play a game of chess and your next move, you don't know what theme it is. You don't know whether your next move, oh, I need to play this because of shouldering, or I need to play this because of the special features of a knight's pawn or anything like that. You don't know. You've got to understand all those concepts and play the best move of chess as you play a game. Best move in that game of chess as you play that game of chess. But yeah, anyway, black to play. Let's tick off this last concept and then just steadily make our way through all of these positions. Some of them are quite hard, which is good, making us think. But yeah, this is so simple. As it happens, black's only got one winning move here, which surprised me when I looked at this position, because I looked at it and I thought, well, that wins and that's simple, and that's just that concept. But there must be other winning moves, and I bet you when I go and look at the solutions, it's going to say, well, the simplest way to win is this, although as it happens, this would take you to a win as well. But no, there is only one winning move. But when you see it, it's not just the fact it's just the one winning move. It's such a simple move. So ending 22 in the Book of Jesus is basically, if the side with the pawn in rook versus pawn, if the king of that side is cut off on the 3rd rank, it's just a simple win. You just leave that king cut off, and when the pawn hits the 6th rank, you just come back and attack it. The king can't defend it, so it has to move, and when it moves, you come and stick your rook behind it. Rooks have to be moved with red arrows, obviously. Can't believe I did a blue arrow there. And that's it. Okay. This king and this pawn are going to win this rook by themselves. So you've got a compartmentalization thing going on here. Now in chess, compartmentalizing doesn't always work. In fact, that is what dual-purpose king moves are. If you think back to king and pawn endings, the whole point about dual-purpose king moves, like the famous Reti position, for example, is that the side that looks like it's won can say, right, well, this king and my king's going to help my pawn promote, and independent of that, my king's going to stop his pawn promoting, and independently of that, my pawn's going to promote. And actually, we use dual-purpose king moves to see, actually, well, we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone a little bit. So there's a compartmentalization. Sorry, I'm waffling a little bit here, but there's a compartmentalization thing going on in this position, and it doesn't always work in chess. You can't just say, well, that's going on in that bit of the board, and that's going on in that bit of the board, and they've got nothing to do with each other. We have to be aware that they might have something to do with each other. But here they've got nothing to do with each other. This rook is going to win this pawn by itself because the king's cut off. And independently of that, this king and this pawn are going to win this rook. White's only real try to sort of link the compartments, as it were, would be something like rook a1. And then we go king e2. And when the pawn gets pushed, we can queen. And I would take with the king. Usually that's a disastrous move in rook versus pawn. The whole point is you want your king close to the action. Just out of interest, would rook takes? No, see, rook takes would throw away the win. So I'd definitely take with the king. But all we do now is we just leave our rook there. You know, the king can make its way around here if it really needs to. I just deliberately picked a ridiculous route there, but we've got all the time in the world, because as soon as white pushes the pawn, we go rook f6 and that pawn's gone. So yeah, in the original position, rook f4, very easy win. That's the last concept ticked off. We now have all the concepts from endings 21 to 29 in the Book of Jesus, and we can now just keep looking at different positions. So this is a game from 2000. It is white to play. Pause the video and decide what you'll do. Couple of winning moves. I found one of them, but it's not the better one, I don't think. I didn't play this. It's reasonably easy to analyse that all the way down to the end. I mean, I'm not going to here, but you know, counting out the moves. What would you play here as black, by the way? There's a move here I would sort of just play by hand, which is, in my view, a good move. It's unnecessary here, but I would play king f5 with a sort of shouldering thing in mind. I mean, the shouldering thing's probably not relevant here because the king's sort of already over this side of the board rather than coming in from over here. So, I mean, king g5 is just as good to draw. It's just a simple counting thing. I'll let you count it out, but e8 queen doesn't do it. I played rook c8. I thought rook c8 was a good move. Because black now has to play rook a7, otherwise we're getting a queen. And when we bring the king back to d6, black has to take that pawn. King takes. King g5. Notice black doesn't want to get cut off, so they have to play king g5. Check. And it's a rook's pawn, so we just check the king down the board. Final position, h1 equals queen, rook c1's checkmate, but it's not h1 equals queen, it's h1 equals knight check. Alright, your knight's in the corner. Okay, that defensive trick doesn't work against it. You know, if you've got a rook's pawn, you're losing your knight, you're losing the game. So rook c8 does win. You know, and I thought I cracked it, and I went to the solutions, and I can't remember what it says precisely, but it says something along the lines of, it correctly says something along the lines of, like, rook c8 does win, but it's not as good as rook c5. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh yeah. Cut that king off, because it's on its third rank. This pawn's going to win this rook over here. It's done. It really is just, it's so easy, isn't it? I mean, you could say the rook c8 move I found, or you may have found as well, was also relatively straightforward, but this, I don't think anyone could argue that this isn't easier. Rook a7 check, king to d8. Now the pawn has to be taken straight away, because otherwise, if rook back to a8 check, rook c8 and we're going to get a queen. So rook takes e7, king takes e7. Black pushes the pawn, and you know what I would do here, contradicting all of the engine's best moves, because the engine will find many paths to victory, I would just bring my king round on that long walk. We can literally just leave the rook on c5 until this pawn gets to h3. As soon as that pawn gets pushed, we play rook c3, and we just win that pawn, as described before. It's a very easy thing for a human being to do. We don't need to get involved in diverging from that very simple plan, because, well, we're not an engine. So just stick to that simple plan. Don't move your king in front of the rook. Obviously, that'd be very, very stupid, because it allows the black king in that you've just cut off. If I was black, I would just move back and forth on g6 and h6 and hope that white brings their king to c4 or c3, and then I can push the h-pawn, because they've just stupidly stopped themselves from playing rook c3 in that very simple plan. As it is, king c4 here, after I play king back to h6, king c4 is still winning. It's actually the engine's second best move, and its best move now is checkmate in 17. That's the fastest route to checkmate. No way I'd play that in a million years. No way. I would stick to the plan, leave the c3 square free for my rook to get to, and now I can come round. And it's at this point black would realise, oh, okay, I don't think he's going to let me play h3 without winning the pawn, and it's gone. So yeah, two winning moves, rook c8 and rook c5. But I'll be surprised if anyone disagrees that rook c5 is the simpler way of doing it. I'd like to pretend it wasn't, because rook c8 is the move that I went for, but next time I'm hoping my brain will find the simpler rook c5 idea. Right, next, this is a game from 2002. It's black to play. Pause the video. I'll tell you what, I'll phrase this one as decide in light of what we've all just discussed, that the move that you definitely wouldn't play, and then also in light of that, the move that sort of the logical move that therefore presents itself from that rationale. Right, so hopefully the move you decided that you definitely wouldn't play is b4, and because your king is cut off. And it's the compartmentalizing thing again. This king and this pawn are definitely going to win. My God, this king and this pawn are definitely going to win this rook. And independently of that, this rook has cut off this king. So yeah, you think, well, I can't play b4 because my king gets cut off on my third rank. So that's bad. Yeah, so don't do that. I mean, the game would continue something like h7. Rook there, king g7, rook back to a7, king g8. That pawn now has to be taken, and you can see that's just gone in the same way as the previous positions. So if the logic is, well, I can't play b4 because my king gets cut off, it's not difficult to see what you should play, not even having a clue whether it's drawn or not. I mean, like, you know, b4 is obviously lost, so if I can get a draw out of this, it can only be achieved by using that pawn as shelter to get my king up. As it turns out, king a5 is a draw, and that's what was played in the game. Okay. White then played h7. What would you do next as black? In the game, rook c8 was played. It's a blunder. It throws away the draw. White is now winning this position, although it's not easy to see how, but it's doable if you really think about all the themes and concepts that we've looked at. So bearing that in mind, what black should have done, and this is the bit where, from black's perspective, I think I would be annoyed with myself. I wouldn't be annoyed that after rook c8, I didn't see rook h5, which is the only winning move. That I don't think you can berate yourself too much for that. I mean, you can berate yourself a little bit and go back and study rook versus pawn, but you can't be like, oh my God, I should have seen rook h5, what an idiot. It can't be like that. But what it could be is, why didn't I just calculate rook takes h7, king takes h7, and then count out the moves? Because that's definitely something I would be annoyed with myself over. Like, regardless of whether rook, where was it, c8, was wrong, it doesn't matter whether rook c8 is a drawing move or not. This is a forcing line, and you just count out the moves. It's just counting. It's a draw. So the player playing black, well, if it was me, I would be annoyed with myself. The player playing black is a miles better player than I'll ever hope to be. But if it had been me, I would have been annoyed with myself that I didn't even calculate rook takes h7, because it's just a simple counting exercise to a drawn position. So rook c8, I mean, you can see the principle of it. It's just sort of trying to get white's king even further away. It's almost like just making sure, but then you see Rook H5. It's like, oh, didn't see that. And the idea of Rook H5 is that we're going to queen and not have our king further away, because we're not having to move our king away from the action. We can now take back with the rook. So Rook H5 is a very good move. And now black's got a choice. In the game, King B4 was played, which is a sensible move. It loses, but it's a sensible move. I mean, one of the reasons it loses, like I say, we take back with the rook, and the king's already quite close to the action. So one idea you might have as black is, let's try and keep it so the king's a long way away from the action. So we won't let white do that. We'll bring our rook behind the pawn and again force them to bring their king forward. And then you're forced to take on h7, obviously. Rook takes h7. And then play king b4. But the problem is we wasted a move with rook h8, so it doesn't really gain you a tempo. It's just almost a transposition, really. The white king is, well, it would be here, I suppose, but it's kind of just as close. It's enough to win. So if we go back to this position, king b4 was played in the game. The only other choice I suppose black had is, rather than cut across the pawn, you know, so that we've got the shouldering thing going on in a minute, they could just try and save a tempo by not stepping in front of their own b pawn and just go for the simple counting. But unlike the previous line, where black should have taken on h7 and dragged the white king away, this time round the white king hasn't been dragged. Oh, the white king hasn't been dragged away. So as you go through it and count it out, you can see that white is just in time, and hence that's why rook c8 was losing. So back in this position, they didn't go for the simple counting. They did try to at least step in front of the pawn. As it turned out, there's at least one black actually gets another opportunity later. Kind of unbelievably, actually, because if you think back to rook h5 is a good find there. That's a very good move. You know, to really understand the principle of needing that extra tempo. You don't want your king being dragged away from the action. So, and you know, you want your king sort of behind the pawn anyway. So that level of understanding is, in my view, quite high, and hence a bit of a surprise that this player, again, someone who's miles stronger than I'll ever hope to be, then went and messed it up in a pretty catastrophic way in a minute, as you'll see. King b4. h8 equals queen, takes, and then it's just the race. King c3, and you just get on with it. You just do the usual stuff in that race to that crossroads. What would you play here as whites? It's an easy one. It really is an easy one. And it's not that. Wow. A very highly rated player played king f5, completely chucking away the win. Oops. You've got to play the time gaining check. And then you just count it out. White to play is a win, black to play is a draw. And in fact, because the rook's already behind the pawn, as it quite often is, because you've delivered that time gaining check, white has two winning moves here. King e2 is one of them, rook c8 check is the other one. Yeah, so you had to play the time gaining check there. Incredibly, even after finding that really good rook h5 move, white doesn't find it and just chucks away the win. King f5, b4, king e4, b3, king e3. White to play is a win, black to play is a draw. It's black to play. It's a draw. If you're listening to this and you haven't watched the first couple of rook versus pawn videos where I just bang on and on and on about learn these four positions, watch them. So if I'm saying white to play is a win, black to play is a draw, you go, oh, how do you know that? What's going on? Watch the other videos, basically. Right, next, this is a game from 1962. It is black to play. Can you save this game? And this G pawn looking pretty close. On the other hand, you have got this F pawn. Black to play. What would you do? So you can save this game as black. Obviously, you don't push the f-pawn. That would be very silly, because then you just lose your newly queen's queen, or newly knighted knight, or whatever, or newly bishop to bishop. Is there a verb to bishop? I'm going to look that up in a minute. Is bishop a verb? Should be, I think. I'm going to bishop the pawn. Anyway, you didn't sign up for this, did you? Rook versus pawn mixed bag. Some sort of English nonsense. Black plays king g6. It's quite simple, but incredibly the player playing black managed to also play very well, and then completely balls it up in a minute. This was back in 1962. Rook f8, take the g-pawn, rook takes f2, and the white king just isn't in time. Just counting out the moves. The white rook is very sort of unfortunately placed. White to play is a win, black to play is a draw. And it's black to play, so it's a draw. But remember that my advice was, if you're the side trying to draw this, always push the king. Always. Just do that. Doesn't matter if it's a rook's pawn or a non-rook's pawn. Black to play is a draw. Push the king, and it will be drawn. Okay. I mean, have a think about what your next move is and all the rest of it. You know, you do have to. I've left you to sort that out yourselves. Why this is a draw. But if you always push the king, even though you don't need to push the king for a non-rook's pawn, you could push the pawn. If it wasn't a rook's pawn, you still draw. Why give yourself the choice? Just always push the king, and it's a draw. And the reason that rule's useful is because if you don't push the king, in the case of a rook's pawn, you have lost. And I find it kind of quite baffling, to be honest, that the player playing black played all these good moves, got all the way down to here, and then just threw the game away with h2. And it's because it's a rook's pawn. Okay. At this point, well, at this point you could just queen if it wasn't a rook's pawn, because after rook h8 check you'd have king i2. But there is no I file, so you've got to knight. King back to f3, your knight's lost. And the game finished like this. Black resigned. Oops. Yeah, so astonishing stuff there. He got to the crossroads position. It was a draw, and then just didn't know how to draw it. Oh, sorry, left this one not on the starting position. Right, pause the video. Is white to play? You're obviously in check and about to take that rook. Do you take it with the king? Do you take it with the rook? Have a think about it. Which one would you take with? Right, this one is this is hard. Like I say, game from 1984, and in the game, white now played rook takes f7, which throws away the win. And seeing that this line doesn't win is, I would say that's fairly doable. Okay. h5, rook g7 check, king f3, rook h7. So it wasn't really a time gaining check particularly, but because the king was, in fact the king was already on g4, wasn't it? Yeah, so it wasn't a time gaining check, but it is a get your rook behind the pawn check and start bringing your king down. White to play is a win, black to play is a draw, and it is black to play, so it's a draw. And unlike that previous position from 1962, this time the person playing black did know you have to push the king. Okay, rook g7, king f1, and they agreed to draw there. Rook g7 check gave black a last chance to blunder by going in to the corner. You have to play king f1 there. So I would say that's reasonably calculable, whatever the word is, that rook takes f7 doesn't win. It's hard to see why king takes f7 does, though, to be fair. King takes f7, h5, king g6, h4, and the black king's just really well placed, sort of just shouldering away the white king, which is sort of annoying. But white can still win it from here. The white rook's awkwardly placed and kind of needs to move anyway. Okay, the fact that it's a rook's pawn coming down the board means that what you'd really like to do, if you could, is set up that sort of check down a rank, all the way to the bottom rank where black would have to knight, but then it's a lost knight because it's a rook's pawn. You just shove your king onto f3. So get your rook off to the side suggests itself, but then black can play h3, and your king is still sort of being shouldered out the game. That king on g4 is really well placed. Hopefully giving it away by now. Okay. The plan is rook a2, but you shove in an intermezzo rook g2 check. Just give that black king a nudge. It's got to go somewhere. And it's saying, well, I don't want you to come to g5 or f5. It's like, well, all right, we'll go to h5. Hit the rook. There it goes, off to a2, king g3, check, king g2, king g4. We've transposed into what would happen if, after rook g2 check, the black king hits the rook straight away. Rook off to the side, h3, king g5, h-pawn can't be pushed, king g3, check, and we see all the way down to knighting and king f3. So that was a hard one, I thought, but yeah, king takes f7 does win the game. Not rook takes f7 as was played in the game. It ended in a draw. And then rook g2, just give that king a nudge. It's got to go somewhere. It can't stay on g4. It's very annoying for us on g4. Okay. So this move, this rook g2 that we move playing here, that's basically rook a2 with giving the king a little nudge out of the way en route. Right, next, this is a game from 1955. It is white to play. We are clearly about to lose our rook for this pawn, and we're going to win this one. But our next move, as far as I can tell, well, I suppose you could always consider rook e2 check, but I'll just give you a little hint, it's not that. Yeah, we're going to win this pawn, but we've got a choice. You know, do we take with the king? So we've got a rook's pawn on the third rank, or do we take with the pawn? So we've got a knight's pawn on the fourth rank, which sounds better, but our king's the wrong side of the pawn. You've got to count out all the various moves and work out which one is the best option for you in this case. Yeah, pause the video and have a go at it. So in the game, this was from 1955, this game, white played h takes g4, and it's a losing move. Should have taken with the king. But there are a few more twists and turns to be shown in what happened in the game, actually. But let's just go through the king takes, first of all, the way it should have gone. King takes, queens takes, rook takes a1. Best to take with the rook because you kind of want it behind the pawn anyway, and you want your king closer to the action. h4, king c3, h5, king d4. What would you play here as white? White to play, what would you play? If you've watched the rook versus pawn shouldering video, you should have played that in a flash. It might be that it's unnecessary, but you still should play it because there's no reason not to. It's a good principled move. Maybe you need it. That's what I would play in time trouble. And it is the only drawing move. You king g5 would have lost. Okay, because you've basically stopped the king coming in, and now black has to play a rook move they didn't really want to play. It may as well be rook behind the pawn, king g6. Black to play is a win, white to play is a draw, and it's white to play, so it's a draw. So that's what white should have done. They should have taken on g4 with the king, simply counted out the moves. Maybe they did count out the moves and they just missed the shouldering idea en route. But anyway, h takes g4 was played, and then we saw the rook being lost for the pawn, with black correctly taking with the rook to keep their king closer to the action. And now white has a choice. One choice is just to sort of go for it. That should be very easy to count. Count that. see if it's any good. Hopefully you counted out that it's not. Okay, so that's no good. So you've got to go for the other option, which is to sort of lose a tempo stepping in front of your own pawn, but at least you're hopefully going to be doing some top level shouldering by being the right side of the pawn. And we've seen positions where stepping in front of your own pawn is the correct move. Let's have a look. So king c3, king f6, king d4. Yeah, so king d4. Sorry, this is where unbelievably black chucks away the win at this point. Because you should be playing rook f1 check, of course, the time gaining check. King e6, rook g1, king back to f5, and then king d4. Okay, and that would go g5, king there, king f6, king d6. White to play as a win, black to play as a draw, and because the black rook's already black to play as a win, white to play as a draw, and because the black rook's already behind the pawn, if you wanted to, you've got a choice between these two moves of how to win it. So yeah, another player with the black pieces not appreciating the importance of the time gaining check. So I just got a little bit miffed by my own analysis there, because I think I've stupidly put the time gaining check in on the next move in my prep, which is useless. Yeah, the time gaining check is now completely useless to us now, and I'm not sure it doesn't really gain any time. We're still going to get down to white to play as a draw, and it is white to play. Okay, so yeah, it was back on this move the time gaining check had to come in, where it does actually gain some time. Anyway, so in the game it went king d4, g5, and then this is almost the bit where it looks like black didn't even realise anything about that crossroads position anyway, and played rook a6 check. Although it's actually quite a good move, because white's only got one drawing move here. Pause the video and decide what you'd do. And well done if you found king f5. That's the only drawing move, shouldering away the black king. If you went king f7, the black king's in, king e5, and after g6 we'd see rook a7 check, king has to go back to, I don't know, f8, and the pawn's gone. So yeah, king f5 was the correct move, shouldering. Rook a5 check, king f6, king comes in, g6, rook a6 check, and now inexplicably white just blunders horrendously in the game of king g5. King f7 is a very easy draw. King f5, g7, perhaps they didn't know the knighting trick, which is now theoretically a draw, although I wouldn't fancy defending it. And that particular one, when it's a knight's pawn, it's like straight away white's got problems, and I think that the tragi-comedy is to seen in so many games as your knight ends up on g4 in about 3 moves time and it's already lost because your knight's too far away from the king. Let's not get sidetracked by that, but king g5 was played in the game, trying shouldering again, but it's just a big mistake because it doesn't really shoulder. King e5, g7, rook a8. I think they resigned there, but it could have gone on to here, couldn't it? So wow, yeah, should have taken with the king, easy draw, just counted out. Actually took with the pawn, threw away the win. Black then threw away the win, took with the pawn, threw away the draw for white a minute ago. Black now threw away the win by not doing the time gaining check. White did some really clever shouldering there, and then did some not very clever non-shouldering there, and ended up losing it. So loads of different mistakes there. I mean, that game was from 1955, but still, you know, top level players of the time. Right, 3 more to go. This one's from 1962. It is white to play. You can see you've got a bit of an issue here. How are you going to stop that pawn? Obviously, we're going to try and give up our rook for that pawn and hope that this pawn versus this rook is enough to save the day. This is hard. You know, if you're going to be serious about solving this, pause the video and have a real long think about it. And by the way, on any of these, if you don't, you know, if you go through some variations in your head and they don't lead you anywhere, feel free to sort of then pick up the pieces. I tend to try and solve the positions in the position they're in, and then if that doesn't get me anywhere and I'm sort of, you know, finding it too hard, I then will just pick up the pieces and start trying a few things. I still think that's better than going to the solution straight away. But anyway, pause the video, have a think about it. What would you do? So in the game, I believe Rook C8 was played, and you can see the idea. Black pushes the B pawn, check, King comes into F3, takes, and now I'm afraid it's just hopelessly lost with the same winning technique that we've seen already, all the way up to a knight on H8 being completely lost with a king on F6. But if you go through and think about what happened there, it's here. Rook C2 check. That's just a check that picks up the B pawn. Fine. But we don't tend to think too much about Black's king move. You see, you think, oh, Rook C2 check, king moves, and I'll take the pawn. It's like, well, hang on, king moves where? And the point is the king moved up a rank, so that Black had that check you back down the board towards them from their perspective. I mean, what you'd really want to do here, to be honest, is rather than improve Black's king position, you want to play Rook C1, and then when Black promotes, then take it. So you've still lost the rook for the pawn, but crucially you haven't improved Black's king position en route. You've gained a tempo on, I mean, that's a move Black wants to play anyway. I hope we can see the problem with Rook C1. It's like, yeah, I want to do that. I want to go Rook C8 and then Rook C1. So is there a way to get our rook to the first rank? Well, there's this check, Rook E8 check. If the king steps up, by the way, not only are we getting our rook to the first rank, but we're shoving it on B1, and that's then very good. Okay, so the only way Black's now going to sort of evade a series of checks is to, I suppose they could have their king on C3, and then we wouldn't want to put our rook on B1, but then the Black king's miles away from the action. Yeah, the only sensible way that Black can sort of get rid of these checks is to move the king behind our king, so the checks run out. But now we've got Rook D8, so that when B2 is played, we don't deliver a check improving Black's king position. We play Rook D1. Black still has to spend a move to win our rook. So by the time this part of the game starts, you know, H5, H6 and so on, or check or whatever, the Black king's too far away. So H5, King G3, Black desperately tries to get set up the, you know, checking us down the board to a trapped knight on H8. But we're just one move ahead of that other line. It's really, really very clever. Yeah. Rook E8 check. We just keep checking Black. If Black ever comes up to the third rank, we can then bring our rook to the first rank and even stick it behind the pawn. I've got a feeling if the Black king's on C3, you might be better off just leaving it and just getting on with this. But the Black king could be miles away on C3, and that'll be drawn. The Black king needs to sort of stay this side, doesn't it? But yeah, I mean, if you imagine if the Black king's on F3 and we just put our rook on B1, that's definitely going to be a draw. Okay, so Black's only sensible plan really was to evade the checks like that so that when we bring our rook to the first rank, it gets lost straight away. But it's pretty much the other position, but with the black king one rank further down. Next, this is a game from 2001. I reckon this one's quite simple, to be fair. White to play, what would you do? Pause the video, have a go at it. And if it was me, the first thing I would do is just sort of think about, well, if I just shove the rook out of the way and count moves down to that critical variation. Sorry, I've just realised, I said this is quite simple, it's not quite simple. I would shove the rook out of the way and count moves down to the critical crossroads position, I keep calling it, and see whether that's any good. So black plays king e3, we deliver the time gaining check, fine. And if you do then count moves down to that critical crossroads position, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, not in that order because the f-pawn got dropped in the order I just played it. Oh, white to play as a win, black to play as a draw, that's black to play, it's the draw. Okay, so I reckon I'm more than capable of counting that out back here and then thinking, oh, rook g8 doesn't work. Okay, but hang on a minute. That didn't work because we got shouldered away. The black king was on the right side of the pawn. Why don't we make the black king on the wrong side of the pawn? And it's done. And we'll carry on playing out the moves. The engine reckons f3, king g5. It's gone. So yeah, apologies for saying that was a simple one. It's sort of it is just a case of counting, but there's the extra twist of go the other side, and we've seen that in one of the harder positions already. Right, last one. This one definitely isn't simple. You could spend ages on this. There's loads going on in this position. It's white to play. This is a game from 1922. Pause the video and see if you can work out, well, how on earth do you save this game, basically? Yeah, so this one is very hard, trying to work out how on earth you save this game, because there's a lot of different variations going on. And room for both sides to sort of mess it up. Like even in the game continuation, which is a loss for white, there was a chance for black to sort of mess it up and hence maybe make a bit of sense of white's opening move. Shouldering should feature, basically, straight away. We don't really want the black king getting close. So the correct opening move is king e3. But in the game, king d3 was played. And that allows the black king into f2, fine. And then white pushes the d pawn. Now you can sort of see the sense behind this, because and why king d3 was played originally. White's trying to sort of multitask, helping those two pawns, and just whichever one they can use basically to win the rook for that pawn. Because now if black tries a sort of a very what's the word, not obvious, but a feasible sort of an understandable move, rook h4, just cutting the white king off from defending the d pawn, and that would work, of course, if white didn't have an a pawn. But d6, rook h6, that's the move, by the way, that wins that pawn. And you just say, all right, yeah, you won my d pawn, but my king's in, and that would actually lead to a draw. So that was white's logic, I suspect, behind letting the black king into f2. It was like, yeah, I know you're coming in here, but I need to help both my pawns. It's a mistake, and in the game, black showed them it was a mistake by playing king f3. The game now, white sort of went a bit wrong here. I don't really know why they played this move, king c4. King d4 is just as lost, to be honest, but it seems king c4 seems a bizarre move. But yeah, it's king c4. You see king f4, push the d pawn, the black king just keeps coming back, and what would you do there? You're either letting the black king in, or if you push the a pawn, rook a8. So it didn't really help white's cause to play king d4, but in the game king c4 was played. I mean, I think we could almost stop it there, to be honest. We can see that white's getting slowly pushed off the board by the black king and rook. And yeah, the game carried on, but there's nothing else to say there, is there? Many different ways for black to win that. They happen to choose that one. Fine. But king d3, you can see the idea, and it works if black plays rook h4 there. But black doesn't. Black concentrates on getting their king back, which is a thing the attacking side should be trying to do anyway. We've seen that in other positions, and particularly where it's rook versus pawn, and there's like an irrelevant pawn floating about. You could regard this as sort of an irrelevant pawn in a way. Just ignore that. Get the king back. Stop this one. That's the plan. And yeah, it just wins for black. So in the original position. I mean, you could try something like king f3. That's definitely giving up on your a pawn, isn't it? But now rook h4, it cuts the king off, and the king's just too far away from the action. So king e3 is the correct first move. Because now, if black tries this, cutting off rook h4, which would win again if we didn't have an a pawn, now we push the a pawn. The king comes in, not to f2, but to g2 at least. Push the a pawn. King g3. And now white's got two drawing moves, one of which I'm not even going to talk about, I don't think, actually, in this video, but it is a drawing move just out of interest, which is king to d3. But two other moves that suggest themselves are the pushing of the pawns. Which of these two pawns would you push? And if you push the a pawn again, that's now lost. But finding black's next move isn't easy. It isn't easy at all, because it's not. It sort of is an intuitive move, but isn't. It's king g4. Which is like, yeah, all right, get the king back, but you've just let white's king cross the sort of the cutting off barrier. King g5, king e5, rook back to h8. That's sort of going to hold on to the a7 pawn. Just keep getting your king back. King g6, king e6, check. That king was annoying. We're checking it off there on our way to a8. It's gone. Okay, I'm sure king g7 was a win there as well, wasn't it? Yeah, king g7 must have. I mean, my natural inclination was just to bring the king round. That was what came to me by hand there. But I'd also prepped in advance this move, and we're there again, aren't we? Black to play as a win. White to play as a draw, and it's black to play. So it is a win. Black has only one winning move because the rook isn't behind the pawn. If the rook was behind the pawn, king g7 would be a winning move. But as it is, you'd have to play rook e1 check, and we're coming in with the king. I'm a bit. Maybe that's what actually happened in the game or something, because I know it didn't, because I've already been through the game. Yeah, I'm not sure why I didn't play that. That's the move I think I would play. But I mean, maybe it was just to demonstrate, look, we've got this position again. Anyway, so black wins that. If we push the a pawn with this rather strange looking, intuitive yet counterintuitive king g4. Intuitive because we're getting the king back, counterintuitive because we're letting the white king in. But white shouldn't play a6. White should play d5, which looks a bit odd because your a pawn's gone. Okay. But then we play d6, and all of a sudden it's like, uh-oh, how am I handling both these pawns? Because the a pawn's kind of in the way of where the black rook wants to get back to. So the a pawn goes, but then the king comes up the board, and you can now see, I think, this was the way to draw it. That's pretty clearly drawn now, isn't it? Yeah, really, really hard. We do use the a pawn and the d pawn, but But yeah, it's king e3, you get cut off, you push the a pawn, and then you push the d pawn, so that when the rook comes in, you can push the d pawn again, and that a pawn's up on a5, which means that when the rook takes it, your king's in, and you've got enough there to draw. Anyway, loads of ideas there on rook versus pawn, mixed bag. We covered that final concept that I hadn't covered, ending 22 in the Book of Jesus, just cutting the king off. So saw a few examples of that in the end, cutting the king off on the third rank. But loads of other themes from the other videos hopefully creeping in there as well. Shouldering, the crossroads position, I keep calling it. You've got to learn that position inside out. I've got one more video to make on rook versus one pawn, although some of the positions in that weirdly aren't rook versus one pawn, but it's just a video of 5 studies which are absolutely brilliant. I really enjoyed all of them. Don't think I got anywhere with any of them, but I really enjoyed them. So I'm just going to make that, and then we'll move on to rook versus more pawns. 2 in fact. So that being the number after 1.